briefly in Houston, actually teaching at Lee College at Baytown, was the artist Guy Johnson. Guy Johnson currently lives in Holland. He's an active artist. He showed with the New Arts Gallery in 1957, 8, and 9, and later with the David Gallery in the 60s. Anyway, excuse me, I'm looking through notes and not finding everything. This is a collage with painting, which is very typical of the work that he was doing at the time. Guy Johnson, with whom I'm in contact, as several of us in town are, moved out of Baytown, Houston area in, I guess, 1961 or 62, I think probably 61, and has lived either in New York or Holland since. His work is in the Menil collection, and I bought this particular painting from Leland Marsters. Carroll Sims came to Houston in 1950. He answered the call of John Biggers in Texas Southern University. John's first appointment as a companion professor at Texas Southern University. Carroll graduated from the Cranbrook Academy of Art. As I mentioned, so many of the Houston people of that period did go to Cranbrook. In 1953, he would have studied with Carl Milas and those other sculptors who worked at Cranbrook, who followed in the tradition of Carl Milas. He was the first African American to graduate from Cranbrook University, Cranbrook Academy of Art. He had a show at the Toledo Museum of Art in Ohio. He had Fulbright grant to the Royal College of Art in London, and he was hired to teach sculpture and ceramics. This particular piece, which is called African Queen Mother from 1969, was given by Jane Blaffer Owen and Susan Macashan. Susan Macashan and Jane Owen both worked very hard with Texas Southern University to provide the students with adequate machines for ceramics and some of the other programs. I should say that Carroll passed away also this past summer here in Houston. He is a presence that will be greatly missed. Hanna Stewart had from Birmingham, Alabama, did her graduate work at Cranbrook Academy of Art, where she met Ruth Laird, the potter that you saw a few images back. She moved then, after graduating, to the city of Houston and taught at the University of Houston and later at St. Thomas University. She mostly was known in the early years for her ceramic work, but she began to work increasingly in metal, and by the late 60s in cast bronze. By the 70s, there was a large bronze that she made that is on the hill at the Miller Theater Hill in Herman Park. This piece is the earliest piece I can find that she did, and the only piece that I could find an image of her work prior to our deadline date here of 1970. None of the images I'm showing you are later than 1970. Hanna died in Albuquerque this past spring. This is me. This is Richard Stout. I came to Houston in November of 1957. My host was Preston Frazier, who I'd been given an introduction to, and his generosity paved the way for me in many areas. I met everyone worth meeting in Houston within 2 or 3 weeks. The second night I was in Houston, I was taken by Preston to a cocktail garden party at the home of Leila McConnell and Henry Gabois. A beautiful house designed by Robert Prusser on the banks of the Spring Creek in Spring Branch. It was a magical evening, aspidistra garden going down to the bayou, charming little house, and 30 people who would be on my side for the next 15, 20, 30 years, as long as they lasted. I'm from Beaumont, Texas. I went summer schools for 2 years at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for my undergraduate degree and graduate degree. At the University of Texas, Austin, between 1966 and 1969. I taught at the Museum of Fine Arts School from 58 to 65. I was acting dean of the Museum of Fine Arts School from 65 to 66. I was associate professor at the University of Houston from 55 to 94. I was acting director of the Blaffer Gallery at the University of Houston in 1974 and 75. As I mentioned, shared a studio with Jack Boynton from 58 to 60. I first show at the New Arts Gallery in 59, and then from Meredith Long Gallery from 1962 for 26 years. This particular painting is from 1958, and it was painted in the studio I shared with Jack Boynton, in that studio on Welsh Street, long been since torn down. Jack Boynton and I shared that studio. I'm down at the other end in another small building with Paul Maxwell. I met Dick Wray on the steps of the New Arts Gallery in the autumn of 1958. We immediately became fast friends. He had just returned from 3 years in Europe, and he had previously studied at the University of Houston School of Architecture. And then when in Europe, he studied at the State Academy of Art in Dusseldorf at the same time that Joseph Beuys was there. I don't know if he was there. And also went on to Copenhagen as well as other places. His particular influences in the early years were Ansgar Jorn and Tapias. He was very excited to see the work of Alberto Bori that James Sweeney brought to the Museum of Fine Arts in the middle 60s. As it turned out, among all of the people that James Johnson Sweeney befriended in the time that he was here, of the artists that Sweeney befriended, and there were a number, he felt most close to Dick Wray. In some ways, Dick Wray was almost like a son to him. He won a major prize in the 1963 exhibition that James Sweeney put up of Southwest painting and sculpture, and he was a Purchase Prize. This for a major painting that went to the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo, New York. He showed for the longest period of time with the Louisiana Gallery in this time period, later with the Moody Gallery. By the way, that painting by Dick Wray was painted by 1961, and it's called Bull. In 1959, Bill Anzalone, who had just graduated a few years before from MIT School of Architecture, where he had had classes with Kepish, arrived in Houston in 1959. He had in previous years been trying to work as an architect, but as the firms that he was with were small and not surviving, he decided after some paychecks that bounced to take up a friend's suggestion and move to Houston, and that he had a studio for him to work in. As we got here, Bill tells me that the friend in Bel Air wanted Bill to help him build the studio, so he rushed around with his wife, and he had a baby, I think, by that time. And he managed to, find 5 jobs. He did apply for the Museum of Fine Arts school position. I remember meeting him when he came into the school office, Lowell Collins's office, and to ask for that position there. Lowell didn't have anything for him. Bill Anzalone applied to teach at the University of Houston to Dr. Peter Gunther, and immediately was hired part-time, and proved to be probably the best drawing teacher the university's ever had. He would be, I think, certainly neck and neck with Ed Hill, who was a younger generation. And that year also began to show with Meredith Long and Company, and still shows his work with Meredith Long and Company. This brings us to one of the most exciting points that happened during this time at the Museum of Fine Arts, and that was the hiring of James Johnson Sweeney as the director of the museum. You must understand that at this time the Museum of Fine Arts was a small institution with a relatively small gallery space and this one large room by Mies van der Rohe that had been shown in successfully by Germaine McCagey and a few other people. I mean, it was always an exciting thing to do. I was able to help a little bit before James Sweeney came. Lowell Collins and I in 1960 were in process of taking in 3 cars a group of like 12 of our students from the museum to go on a 2 or 3, I think it was a 3-week trip, painting trip in Mexico. And on the way down, someone had a newspaper article with him that said that James Sweeney had just resigned as director of the Guggenheim Museum. It was a dispute that Sweeney had over the building of the Frank Lloyd Wright building, and Sweeney continued at the Guggenheim Museum for a short while, and either they fired him or he resigned. I think he resigned. Unbeknownst to me, but we all knew it was probably true, and now we do know that it's true, that as soon as Sweeney resigned from the Guggenheim, that John de Menil got on the telephone and talked with him to come to Houston, and in that trip to Mexico to pick up our train, I think it was in Laredo or San Antonio, I can't remember which, we talked about it, and I said, James Sweeney's coming to Houston, John de Menil's going to see to it. I didn't know for sure, but I hoped. He came here, and it was wonderful to see this arguably the most famous museum director in the world put together exhibitions, and there are many stories I can tell you about James Sweeney, but I think the most important things that I should tell you is that we artists in Houston knew that he was showing the first pick of the newest stuff that was happening in Europe, particularly in Europe, and not as much in this country. Sweeney had little interest in American pop art, as it turned out, so that was a large area that we became deficient in, since made up. But when it came to the greats of contemporary European art, we had the first exhibition here of the work of Alberto Burri in the United States, the first exhibition of the work of the great Spanish sculptor Chayida in the United States. We commissioned a major Chayida actually it was for Jones Plaza in front of the Jones Hall. It was too heavy for the parking garage beneath, so it's been moved in front of the museum. Chayida's first major sculpture exhibitions of the first major exhibitions of the work of Tingley and the like, a very impressive roster, and major standards of exhibition that were wonderful to behold. I was at the museum at the time, and I was given our small staff was asked by Mr. Sweeney to sort of be his second, his other eye. Mr. Stout, what do you think? Does that painting need to go up an inch or to the left a bit? And I would stand, I said, and then I would learn from him. And I said, well, let's see a little bit, and because there was no trouble to see. He installed Cullinan Hall in ways that we couldn't do today, but on very large paintings like the gigantic Miros hanging from wires in the ceiling with the backs covered with white paper, maybe 3 or 4 things in this wonderful large space, wonderful exhibitions that only someone of Sweeney's stature could bring to the Museum of Fine Arts, with the idea of building, and not just on a contemporary level, but on all other levels as well. The collections of the museum, if only people would come up to the plate with funds. Funds were difficult, and I think that Mr. Sweeney probably alienated some of the big fund givers. There was also a problem that he had late in his career with the Blaffer family that I won't go into now, but it's well known. So the Blaffer family having been benefactors of the museum for a number of years. Mr. Sweeney, I think, left in 1968, maybe 69, to be followed by Philippe de Montebello. There's a wonderful new book on James Johnson Sweeney by Marcia Brennan, I think published through University of California, Berkeley. It's called Curating Consciousness. And there is in that book a drawing of James Johnson Sweeney by James Boynton. We had lunch with Marcia Brennan, Jack Boynton, Bill Canfield, Marcia Brennan, and myself. I think it was just the 4 of us, where it came up that there was no good image of Sweeney, and right there Jack did this drawing of Sweeney and sent it to her, and it's included in the book. That's a wonderful thing, because this happened not too long before Jack died, just a year or so before he died. Also at this time, up here at St. Thomas University, in the first years, were Germaine McCagey doing exhibitions. So it was a ping pong between what was most beautiful and most telling, and then afterwards Dominique de Menil doing the exhibitions at St. Thomas. Also a wonderful ping pong of ideas.